Hello. We got a problem, uploaded a short clip from Prime Minister's question time in Parliament. It's called PMQs round here, and it was a discussion dealing with the messy issue of citizenship and deportation. Now, there's a law which I don't happen to agree with. Not that I disagree with the whole thing, but I do think it goes too far. It's the law that if you have dual nationality and you misbehave, then you can be stripped of your British citizenship and deported back to the country in which you have your other citizenship. That's the law upon which Sajid Javid called to refuse to have Shamima Begum back. Now, in that situation, I agree. That is, the woman went abroad and became, in effect, a fighter for a country which had, in effect, declared war upon this country. So, well, treachery is an old-fashioned word, but that's what it was. And, I'm sorry we don't use that word as a legal term anymore. You can't, say, oh, treachery. It's almost like it's a funny term now. It's a joke. But there is that thing. It does exist. So instead, they had to come up with this other rule about, not acting properly or something like that. But here we're talking about people who have committed crimes in this country. Again, I can see the point in deporting them, but the law is so loosely framed that what's happened is you get a situation where a father's misbehaved and his children born in this country lose their citizenship along with him. Now, I happen to think that's probably not too good. But of course, I don't know the details of that particular case. It does lead to anomalies, though. For instance, citizens of India lose their Indian nationality when they become British. Citizens of Pakistan can retain their dual nationality. So it means that if a Pakistani commits a serious crime, he and potentially his family can lose their citizenship and be deported, while an Indian in the same position can't be deported because he doesn't have any other citizenship on which to fall back. You can see the problem. The law can't be applied evenly. On the other hand, you can say if you have dual nationality, then you deserve that. In principle, I don't believe that the idea is a bad one, but I do believe the idea hasn't been thought through sufficiently. And it wouldn't surprise any of you to know that this law was given birth by Theresa May, as incompetent a Home Secretary as she was a Prime Minister. Anyway, to this particular discussion, it starts with Jeremy Corbyn bringing up the subject of a group of West Indians who were supposed to be bundled onto a charter flight to Jamaica because they'd been convicted of serious crimes and, having served their sentences in jail here, were thereafter being sent back to their country of origin. In one case, Corbyn mentions one of the deportees was brought to this country when he was 5 years old. Again, I don't think that's good. My opinion is that if a minor comes here, then he can't be regarded as a foreigner due for deportation. That's the way I feel about it. I can understand that, if he's here and he's committing crimes here that aren't to do with treason, they're just ordinary crimes. I'm not talking about blowing things up. I'd say that was a different matter. I can understand this rule being applied to an adult, but not to somebody who came here as an infant. Anyway, I'm sure some of you think differently, so leave your comments under the video, but do try not to swear. Okay, so we have a headline here from The Independent which should give you an idea of how the left are approaching the argument. It's from the Independent of the 2nd of February, and I do get so cross with these people, and Corbyn does exactly the same thing. I'll show you in a minute. So this is the Independent. Dozens of Caribbean nationals to be deported on first charter flight to Jamaica since Windrush scandal. It's the Windrush thing. It's just the wrong way of approaching it. The Windrush scandal was a story about deportations again. It started with a bad law passed under the incompetent tutelage of Theresa May when she was Home Secretary, and then continued under the even more incompetent tutelage of Amber Rudd, who ended up having to resign over the matter. Have you heard of Amber Rudd since then? Thought not. You won't be surprised to be reminded that she was one of the Tory rebels and stood down in October, probably having at least enough sense to realise that being an independent wouldn't get her seat back. The point is that the Windrush scandal happened because the immigrants from the West Indies who came to Britain before it would be about 1973, did so either without any documentation at all, because it wasn't required, or they came with documentation, but it was destroyed in some sort of bureaucratic clean-up operation. I do that. When I clear up, the minute I clear anything up, I discover I need it. Anyway, back to these guys. About 85 people were deported, and a whole lot of people lived their lives under a cloud for years because they were threatened by a bureaucratic machine, the left hand of which didn't seem to know what the right hand was doing. But it was cleared up. It was considered a scandal because people didn't like it. It did result in the resignation of a minister. It was one of those horrible things that government gets into from time to time. I'm sure the victims of it still feel bruised, but it wasn't anything more than a bureaucratic loop, and everybody knows that. So using that as an argument, trying to link it in some way to active racism, is the most appalling abuse of the Windrush scandal you could possibly imagine. By the way, the joke is that a lot of the workers in the various ministries are themselves of ethnic minority origin. So are we saying that Corbyn's accusing them of racism, or the Independent? Well, is he? Or is it not possible for someone like Corbyn to accuse, let's say, someone of Pakistani ancestry, for instance, of racism? So who is he accusing of racism? So that's not where Corbyn ends. I'm going to play some of it here.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister think that someone who came to this country at the age of 5 and was the victim of county lines grooming and compelled to carry drugs, released 5 years ago and never reoffended, deserves to be deported?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole country would agree that while I cannot comment on individual cases, it is entirely right that foreign national offenders should be deported from this country in accordance with the law.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The government has learned absolutely nothing from the Windrush scandal.
The government's learnt nothing from the Windrush scandal. That's got absolutely nothing to do with the present situation. In fact, that's not true. The thing that this present business does have in common with the Windrush scandal is that the people involved are West Indian. So what Corbyn is saying, in effect, is that one Jamaican and his criminality or his innocence is pretty much like any other Jamaican and his crimes and innocence. There's no difference. So the way Corbyn's looking at it now, all those guys look the same, don't they? So all their social situations must be the same as well, mustn't it?
This cruel and callous government is trying to mislead the British people.
By the way, can anyone tell me what Priti Patel is saying here? Look, I'll play this again.
This cruel and callous government is trying to mislead the British people.
I'd love to know what she's saying. Anyone could lip read? Let me know. Anyway, back to Corbyn.
Into thinking it's solely deporting foreign nationals who are guilty of murder, rape and other very serious offences. This is clearly not the case. Take the example of a young black boy who came to the UK aged 5 and is now being deported after serving time for a drugs offence.
So he's giving this example, as I said, of a kid who was brought here and then went off the rails and served his time and is now being deported. And now Corbyn comes up with what he obviously considers is the coup de grace, the ultimate in an argument, the most persuasive refutation of this government's policies.
If there was a case of a young white boy with blonde hair who later dabbled in Class A drugs and conspired with a friend to beat up a journalist, would he deport that boy? Or is it, Mr. Speaker, is it one rule for young black boys from the Caribbean and another for white boys from the United States?
Now, what Corbyn is referring to is this. Boris Johnson was born in the United States of British parents and was taken back to the UK when he was 5 years old. His dabbling in drugs involved trying cocaine when he was at university. And as for conspiring to beat up a journalist, this was something proposed to him by a friend of his, a contemporary of his, who turned out not to be an honest man. But this, at the time, this was before that all came to light, and this friend proposed the possibility of beating up a journalist over the phone, and nothing ever came of it. Nothing happened. It's total nonsense. How many of us have had friends who said something off colour to us? What is he talking about? As I said, I don't think that law is a good law. I do think that it needs some adjustment, but I certainly don't think that bringing up race is either a decent argument or even a persuasive one. Is Johnson going to look across the dispatch box and say to Corbyn, oh dear, yes, of course, we are all a bunch of racists. We'll change the rules immediately. Of course he won't. Which is what leads me to believe that Corbyn doesn't really want the rules changing. He doesn't want that at all, because he prefers protests to persuasion and name-calling to rational argument. If you want to donate or contact, the information will be rolling over the Graniopteryx as I speak. Please like, subscribe and share because it does help with the algorithm. If you visit my channel on YouTube and one day discover that I've disappeared without warning, you'll still find me on BitChute or Minds. Just go to either of those platforms and do a search for Graniopteryx. If you're already watching this on BitChute or Minds, good for you. Meanwhile, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember that you must keep checking the subscribe and bell icons because occasionally they reset. Till next time.